Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for this invitation. In terms of hemispheric challenges in the area of human rights, and especially because of resource challenges, I would single out 3 areas deserving of prioritization, partly because of their gravity and partly because solutions would entail structural changes that, if implemented, could have positive ripple effects across society. The first concerns certain populations in situations of extreme precarity and vulnerability, notably indigenous peoples, women, irregular migrants, and LGBTI persons. They are more likely to be the victims of human rights violations because of non-existent or discriminatory legislative frameworks, compounded by weak institutions and societal prejudice. Shifting those attitudes, reforming structural environment is essential to eliminating discrimination and enabling full participation by them. Secondly, poverty and inequality are escalating in rich and poor countries alike and should be addressed in a more integrated manner. Third, citizen security is a problem affecting the quality of life of citizens, especially women, children, and the elderly. Given the failure of traditional approaches even to moderate this problem, there is a dire need for more innovative solutions, I think. And for this reason, I would favor strategies that focus on prevention, in addition to the standard ones of just criminalization and punishment. This means more attention to rehabilitation and things like penal reform, and generally programs that seek out to address the root causes of crime. Internally, the Commission's procedural backlog is a persistent problem that requires ongoing attention. Since the petition system is one of its central pillars. As to its methodologies, in addition to the strategies mentioned above, I must acknowledge that some of the Commission's existing practices have been very successful in the past and hold continued value still, such as its country visits, its reports, which serve critical functions of monitoring, information gathering, and facilitating timely and tailored interventions. In addition, I would emphasize a greater role for promotional activities as well as political interventions through dialogue and leveraging existing relationships with states, which are approaches that are more likely to be received favorably and impact positively. Regarding the backlog, the first observation I'd like to make is that cases cannot only be dealt with in a chronological order, as that might result in complete irrelevance given the backlog that is now said to be almost 2 decades. While chronology is the most equitable approach, I do think deviation should be allowed in situations of crisis or great urgency, and relatedly, where precautionary measures may be pending, or where the subject matter might be novel or presents an opportunity for developing the norms and standards of the system. A mix of these approaches will enable the Commission to steadily reduce its backlog while at the same time remaining responsive to current needs. Other strategies could be the joinder of repetitive cases, tighter management of deadlines, and streamlining expertise within the body, which might enhance specialization and thus increase efficiency. And this question, as others have mentioned, is dire indeed, paints a dire picture, but it's very relevant because I think even if states haven't reached all of these or all of these conditions don't qualify for a particular state, there are elements that exist everywhere, individual elements. So the first point I would wish to underline is that where all or any exist, it is imperative to maintain communication with the state concerned. The most influential actor in guaranteeing rights and protecting the markers of democracy is the state. So once a state remains in dialogue with the Commission or the system, the door remains open to advocacy and negotiation for reform. So all opportunities for dialogue should be maximized through, the processes of communication, confidential letters, sharing of reports, and even on individual cases as regards friendly settlements or petitions. Relatedly, I would caution against treating the state as a homogeneous entity, or more obviously as against treating the central government as representative of the entire state. it is important to note that government is an inexact categorization for what can be a sprawling entity comprising 3 horizontal branches of executive, legislature, and judiciary, supported by a civilian network of public servants. Except for the most repressive countries, there are bound to be individuals scattered across this network, populating all the branches, who disagree with anti-rights tendencies and may be sympathetic to reform. So my point is, cultivating or leveraging relationships with those individuals in the public service, especially those highly placed who may be able to moderate the worst excesses or influence policy, can lead to legislative and policy reform. As well, alliance rank and file members of the public service can also be useful, as they are the ones who can provide remedies and alleviate violations in individual cases. But of course, given the extent of the situation that you've painted, obviously you need a multifaceted approach, and critical to this as well is strengthening civil society. The obvious methods through training, technical assistance, and other forms of material support, particularly so that they can learn the techniques and practices to advocate on their own behalf. I think some of the obvious strategies here would be multi-stakeholder processes, providing support for victim support services, and support for strategic litigation. All of this would help to empower civil society and achieve a coordinated response to this. Not forgetting that a key element of this is the media and watchdog groups, given their role in publicizing abuses and countering disinformation. Of course, the Commission alone can't be effective in such a challenging environment, so I agree that partnerships with other actors is essential. I'd particularly like to single out NHRIs, which have proven to be hugely impactful where they exist because of their quasi-governmental status, their official origins and national recognition. They tend to have the ear of play a vital role. And of course, there are the other obvious bodies like intergovernmental ones that can facilitate a developmental agenda. I think these would be the key alliances for the Commission to seek out and cultivate, and to help provide context and standard-based guidance. I'd like to focus on the question on religious freedom, one on substance, and if time permits, the question on the weaknesses and strengthening of the Iachr. It's starting with the topic 3, religious freedom. The question asks about the relationship between the guarantee of religious freedom and the rest of human rights, particularly with regard to LGBTI persons. What I wanted to say about this, first of all, is that what you have with religious rights and other rights is a clash of rights, insofar as protecting them can sometimes have discriminatory results. In my view, the appropriate test in resolving this conflict is not the standard limitations analysis, but rather that of balancing rights, which you don't often see in international human rights jurisprudence. Now, there are 2 points I'd like to make about this. The first thing is, when we talk about religious rights, the first scrutiny that you have to make is whether the claim is properly characterized as a right. And I'm going to give you a small example. Sometimes there has been a lot of domestication, and I mean domestic from various parts of the world, as well as regional litigation around claims based on religion to chastise a child, in other words, for corporal punishment. But many have said that is not that's not a right, so-called, because once it involves violence, inflicting violence on another, that is not properly a right. So the first thing we have to establish is that not just the mere claim of something being a religious right doesn't necessarily mean it's recognized as such in law. The second thing is that once you have the right that's valuable and worthy of protection, the approach should be accommodating both rights that might be clashing, but only so far as there is no harm caused. So, for instance, a state can easily permit a woman to wear a hijab, which causes no harm, contrary to the position taken in some European countries, for instance. But it cannot permit state officials from refusing to officiate at same-sex marriages, which is a pushback we've been seeing, because that is deeply humiliating to LGBT persons, and it reinforces stigma and discrimination by perpetuating prejudices and stereotypes. So my ultimate point is that once something is properly characterized as a right, the appropriate test when it runs up against other rights, whether it's rights of LGBTI persons or indigenous peoples or women, is the extent to which you can accommodate both without causing harm or inconvenience. Perhaps briefly, in the time remaining, I'd like to look at the weaknesses and weaknesses of the Iachr. It's had a lot of attention already today, but I'll mention quickly three of them that we've heard before: the procedural backlog, the problems with compliance, and ultimately disaffection with the system as a whole. In terms of the backlog, I've mentioned some of these strategies already in terms of repetitive cases and systematization. What I would like to caution here is that in addressing the backlog, we must be mindful of not going to the other extreme and then denying relief to genuine victims. On compliance, close monitoring is extremely important. And finally, in terms of disaffection, I would stress the existing methodologies of the system, the dialogue that we've heard so much about, in terms of keeping governments engaged. I'd like to return to the second question, which raised the problems of a shrinking civil space, attacks on human rights defenders and the media, judicial independence, weakening of civil society, only to say that these are challenges that are well known across the region. And what I was saying before is that even if all do not exist in any particular place, there are problems that we see individually, perhaps, or one in one place or another. In this context, in this overall context, coupled with the fact of escalating poverty and inequalities across the region, the relevance of the Inter-American Commission is higher than ever for all of us. I appreciate very much the history, the august and stellar history of the Commission, and value this exercise in finding and identifying the most qualified candidates, the most independent candidates for this really crucial and pivotal role in our region. In terms of my own background, as I've said before, I've had a lifetime of experience, professional experience in human rights, in terms of my work across a range of issues, but from multiple perspectives, both domestic within my own country, but also regional across the Caribbean, and international as well on the UN Human Rights Committee. So it is this experience that I wish to bring to the Inter-American Commission, but more so along with my own personal sensibilities, a deep faith in the morality of the protection of human rights, but also a deep faith in their utilitarian value, and a deep faith as well in the system's core value of promoting a dignified life for all. So it is this experience and this knowledge and this personal ethic that I hope to bring, if elected, to the Inter-American Commission. So I'd like to thank civil society for providing me with this opportunity, and Sahil as well. Thank you very much.